I'm Tim Bird, the Birdman, and this is Palm Beach Live, Work, Play. You were diagnosed with breast cancer.
Right.
What went through your mind?
Oh, what a time. And you know, what, Tim, was sad to me is that moment happens every moment around the world of someone who doesn't yet have the benefit of newer technology, education, training. Every 69 seconds, someone in the world's dying of breast cancer. Right. So that doesn't mean diagnosed. They're, diagnosed more frequently. But so when you ask me to go back to that moment, what I'm sad about is that moment still happens to too many people. Yeah. Luckily, I was educated about my sister's disease, and I happened to be really sensitized to it because I'd had some benign tumors. Obviously, there was something going on with the two of us. We didn't know about BRCA1 or any of that. Genetic background and ability, or rather propensity to develop the disease or any of that then. Sure. It was assumed it might run in families, but nobody really knew. So I felt this sort of hard lump, and then oddly enough, we were sponsoring a conference that day in Dallas, an education conference, and there were these sort of rubber forms that we used to use, we still use, with lumps in them, and I felt one, and I thought, my God, this is not what it was before. Right. And so I was really panicked. I don't think there's a woman who just is told she has breast cancer who jumps up and down and says, gee, that's great. I mean, you just go into panic mode. Sure. After all, you're besieged with information. Now, luckily, we've made it so much easier. I love our website because you go into there and you usually get today, if you're educated, a pretty fast diagnosis of what you have. You go in, but in those days, remember, you didn't have all these, there weren't cancer centers in communities. You didn't run over to the Palm Beach Cancer Center. There was no such thing. If you were lucky, you got to a breast surgeon who then sent you to 4 or 5 other people. It was a maze.
Specialists, yeah.
Scary. And that was if you had insurance coverage.
I'm going to jump back to a time in your life before Susan G. Komen. And when you left Peoria to go to Dallas.
Right.
To work for Neiman Marcus.
Right.
What attracted you to Neiman Marcus and to Dallas from Peoria, Illinois? Well,
I used to go with my mother and Dad. There was a train called the Santa Fe Chief that went from Chillicothe, Illinois to Dallas. Right. And every year we would ride the train to go see Aunt Ruth and Uncle Ted, my father's sister and her husband. Right. And he was very successfully running in health insurance, it was a very new model then. And my parents used to go. So I loved Texas. I thought it was just unbelievable, all this land and ranches.
Wide open spaces.
Then I saw Neiman Marcus, and I was just a little girl, and my aunt used to take us. And it was, you have to imagine growing up in Peoria with maybe 3 or 4 stores to shop in. When we were lucky, we got to go to Chicago 2 or 3 times a year and see Marshall Fields. But it was the beginning of consumerism. Remember, it was Mad Men sort of era. So I loved the idea of I didn't want to go to New York. New York kind of scared me. Yeah. I was a small town girl, I still am. And I didn't want to go to Chicago because everybody I knew was from there and didn't like the weather. And I loved Texas. I just thought it was fascinating. So my parents said, okay, and Daddy was still hoping I'd go to law school, but it was very hard to find a career move. Yeah. So one day, my uncle, who had gotten me sort of a temporary job, suggested I go down there, and people did, and I walked into the office of the head of personnel. He hired me the first day and said they were looking for women who they could promote to become managers, and there weren't too many companies doing that then. And that's because Stanley Marcus, the son of the founder and the great visionary and leader, understood the place of not just having women as models and sales agents, but as leadership in that organization. So I wasn't as interested in fashion as I was in marketing. Right. I was fascinated by marketing, and I was so lucky to have him as a mentor. Wow. I go back, all the great lessons I ever learned about changing a culture came from Mr. Stanley and my father, who was a very successful small businessman, and my husband, who's deceased, Norman Brinker. Right. And I had such great mentors that, and he was one of the best. There wasn't a better salesman and or marketer or retailer in the world.
reading your book, the thought crossed my mind. Most of us could use a Norman Brinker in our lives.
Yes. Oh
my goodness.
My gosh,
Genius.
I had platforms that, and he used to say, he always loved giving me a platform because he liked educating people that he felt were absorbing it.
Sure.
Because, and it wasn't often that a husband really wanted a wife to become better at what she is, and he wanted me to reach my potential.
Yes.
He always said that. That's so unusual. Like my father, I was very lucky to have men in my life because I had some wonderful women mentors, but not until later on. Remember, in those days, there weren't a lot of women leading or doing anything.